All right, welcome back to Western Civ. We're talking about the Greeks in general today. Let's talk about what the Greeks are doing with their brains, with their minds. We know that they hold this very dear. Their gods respect the use of the brain. And so what we see with the Greeks in the classical period, the classical Greeks, we're going to look at three subjects. The Greeks are the ones who are going to define history, which is the subject here, and then also drama, and then philosophy. So these will be the three topics we're looking at here. Let's begin with what we hold most dear, history. The man who brings us history, actually the word itself, is one of the Greeks named Herodotus. And what he is going to want to write down is the history of the Persian Wars. After the Persian Wars happened, the Greeks defended themselves against Persia. He'll want to write this down. Let's record this for posterity. And the Persian Wars, we're looking at the first part of the 5th century there, BCE. So the way he does this is quite unusual. He's going to go out and find people who actually fought in these Persian Wars and ask them what they saw and what they experienced, not just writing a story or writing a play or writing some kind of song, but actually speaking to the people who were there and saw it and asking them questions and explain what happened, explain these events and describe them. And then when he finds that some of the stories don't jibe or sound true, he'll want further investigation. He will actually compare witnesses' testaments as he records them. This process he will describe as historia, the process of asking questions, the process of inquiring about something you want to know about, not just making up a story, but trying to get the facts down. This is what we do, historia. And he goes even further than that. He will take a critical attitude. Now, he doesn't do this perfectly. It's the first time we're going to see this, but he does make an attempt to compare information, as in some of this is credible and some of this is incredible. And in doing this, he will be the father of history, this process of recording events, not just because you want it to be a certain way, but because the witnesses tell you this is how it was. In fact, he will travel. In trying to record the Persian Wars, he will actually travel out of Greece, and he will give us accounts of his view of the world, places he's been, places he's seen. It does get a little bit funny, comical in places when he describes some of the stories he's heard of mythical creatures and mythical places and things like that. But he does try to give us a view of what the world looked like. It was what we try to do in history, try to show that geography plays a role in all this. And then after Herodotus, it continues on. The Greeks will want to perfect this. The Greeks will always be very competitive and want things to be even better. The next one we see is Thucydides. The Greek Thucydides will try to write a history of the Peloponnesian Wars. This will be the event that followed the Persian Wars, and the war that tears Greece up. From 431 to 404, this 30-year war between Athens and Sparta, and then all the other cities get involved too. And he will even do a much better job, getting much more accurate information. One of the reasons for this was actually he was from Athens. He had served in the wars, and he had actually been ostracized. The Athenians ostracized men who lost as one of the problems of ostracism, used unjustly. He had been kicked out of the city, went to Sparta, and got their point of view. So he's actually able to write on both sides. He tried to be more objective, although no one's ever perfectly objective, but he tried to be more objective. And what we see when he writes his history of the Persian Wars is that he actually comes up with a lesson. There's a reason why we need to study history, and he coins the phrase that history seems to repeat itself. If you look at history, over time and over time and over time, we seem to be repeating ourselves. And again, he draws it's human nature. We seem to be making the same mistakes. And in this case, the case of the Peloponnesian War, he points to Athens, that Athens was the bad guy, that the hubris of Athens, the hubris of Pericles, taking the city to war, believing they're unbeatable. And he even compares it to what had happened before, the arrogance of Xerxes, when Xerxes had invaded Greece, believing he couldn't lose. Again, hubris and history repeating itself. So, and they'll continue from there. When the Romans meet the Greeks later on, the Romans will be astounded at this process of recording information for posterity. Not just made up stories, but facts and objectivity. The next subject we want to look at is drama. The Greeks love to gather to watch people perform a story. Drama, they call it. And originally they wore masks and would perform in front of a group of people. This is at a theater, an outdoor theater. They actually would have special places for this. Where this comes from, the idea of telling a story in front of people, is part of a festival, part of a religious festival for one of their gods, Dionysus, the god of wine. So I'm guessing that you would be kind of liquored up as you go to hear a story being told. Well, there are two types of stories to listen to. One is called tragedy, and it is what it is. It is what you know it is, the idea of provoking emotion. What you have in telling these stories is you'll have a hero or a heroine, and they'll be put in a tough situation, and usually hubris plays a role in this. You know, you're going to fall because of hubris, and then they'll have a person up there, a character telling the story. They'll also have the idea of a chorus, a group of people who will act as narration. So it starts off pretty primitive. It starts off with a storyteller and a chorus as a narration, and they'll get more complex. As you'll have a storyteller do a really good job, the next person will say, hey, I can do better than that. And all kinds of innovations over a couple of centuries. And again, that focus on hubris. Hubris always comes up in these things. And then there's a picture of the chorus. The chorus wore masks and would all stand together in a group. So let's look at these Greek tragedies. Why do this? Why tell a story of somebody being hurt? And the word they have is called catharsis. When you watch a play or a tragedy and you identify with the character, and the character brings out emotions. And again, you probably have some alcohol in you, so you're much more willing to get involved with this. The Greeks seem to love it. They seem to love kind of moving into this otherworldly event and letting their emotions out. In a tragedy, it'll be crying, and then when we get to comedy in a second, it'll be that of laughter, letting out your laughter emotions. The other thing that comes up with catharsis is, why do you identify with the character? Well, if the gods are just going to crush this character and the character is fated to die, this doesn't really have a whole lot of emotion. What really draws out the emotion is if you start thinking about free will. These characters are making their own decisions, choosing this way or choosing that way. That really draws out your emotions. If you like the character and the character has a choice in what they're doing, it really brings out the catharsis. Let's talk about the great tragedy writers. We're going to go through three of the great ones in chronological order. The oldest of the great ones, a guy named Aeschylus. He'll be called the father of tragedy, as his tragedies will just really evoke these Greeks. He'll write lots of them, but the most famous one that comes down to us is called the Oresteia trilogy. And again, the Greeks also had this idea of presenting their plays in a set of three. You know, one to get you into the characters, the second one to kind of carry you to the third. So the first one's interesting, the middle one's usually pretty weak, and then the last one everything will come out. In the Oresteia trilogy, we start off with, well, let me tell you about some of the ideas here. You know, they start off with their original plays would be about something that you know, some kind of Greek heroes. And then over time, you know, everyone knows all the old stories. We need something new. And in this one, all the Greeks knew of the siege of Troy and the Iliad. Let's do something different here. Let's talk about Agamemnon. What happened to him? Well, Agamemnon, according to this version of the events, he comes home from Troy. He's victorious. And he comes home to something terrible. His wife, Agamemnon's wife, is planning to kill him. And she's met another man, and they're plotting against him. And they actually do it. They will kill him and, you know, believe that they've done away with, taking over the city from Agamemnon. In the second play, Agamemnon's son shows up, Orestes, and he wants revenge against his own mother for killing his father. And he does this. And in the third one, we have the trial. Orestes is put on trial by the gods. And of course, this is the catharsis. You know, is it right to carry out these sort of things? And then there's a scene of the last of the plays, the trial before the gods. So this definitely would have got you involved and, you know, emotionally attached now to the story of Troy, more than just listening to it as a bunch of events. But what about real people behaving? Next, we move on to Sophocles, and again, we're going to have an evolution here. You know, if the first one gets you involved in these characters and human emotion, let's take it even further. So Sophocles is going to write some tragedies, about 120 of them, of which only about 7 have gotten down to us. So you can imagine that this would be like going to the movies today. Lots and lots of movies going on. His most famous is a group called the Theban plays, talking about the city of Thebes. And they have a interesting story there of a sphinx who was holding a curse over the city. And then a man named Oedipus is able to break it. But the problem with Oedipus breaking this curse is that he has been fated, and I think you probably know what he's been fated to do. He was fated originally to kill his father and then to marry his mother. And he had been put away because of that. Here he is returning, saving the city of Thebes, ends up marrying his mother, whom he doesn't know is his mother. And he finds out about that and, of course, is just terrified. The second play is kind of him leaving the city and about his children. And then the last of the trilogy is about his daughter Antigone, what happens to her, the sadness that happens to her. It's all pretty sad stuff. But again, the idea of free will. Are they fated to do this, or do they have a choice in the matter? I'll tell you about Antigone. Here's Oedipus Rex. It's quite gripping. You've been fated to kill your father. You've been fated to marry your mother. Can you avoid the fate? And then Antigone, of course, is very gut-wrenching as this young girl is told not to bury her brother, who is gone as a traitor against his uncle, and she buries him anyway. And then her uncle takes revenge on her and buries her alive. It's just absolutely terrible stuff. We still see this play performed today. Here's a scene on a Greek vase of poor Antigone, being told that she's going to die. Gripping stuff. And then finally, we'll finish up with Euripides here in the 400s. As we moved along in time, we take this to a whole nother level now. We're going to have multiple characters on stage. We're going to have scenery, and then even more terrifying plots. Of his 95 plays, only 18 have survived to us. His characters will have much deeper emotions. You can actually see their inner lives, see their motivations. And again, getting further away from fate and more toward free will. He also talks a lot more about women. One of his plays is called The Trojan Women, the women of Troy. You know that their city is going to be destroyed, and so here they are, getting ready for the inevitable. And then another of his plays called Medea. And this is where we take a character that Greeks might have known about, a character named Jason, famous for travels with his Argonauts. Well, what happens to him? He comes home to his wife, Medea, who is terribly upset because Jason comes home with another woman and casts her aside, and so she takes action. She is going to kill her own children, her children that she had with Jason. As punishment to him, she'll kill her children. It turns out that they were accusing her of being a witch, and turns out she's pretty nasty. And in the end of the play, she flies off in a chariot pulled by serpents. So yeah, she was a witch. It turns out, pretty evil person. Let's shift gears here, from tragedy like that to comedy. Let's have a laugh here, shall we? Greeks love to laugh. They love to cry in a tragedy, and then they would love to laugh, be brought to let the belly-aching laughs. And what you see in Greek comedies, by the way, we could go down a laundry list of them. All the gags and things that you laugh at today, they were laughing at back then. Everything from word puns to physical comedy, people slapstick, people falling down, people making rude references, fart jokes even. That you might find them funny today. The Greeks found them funny back then. Anything you can think of today that you think is funny, they thought was funny then. Also, satires, making fun of people. Anything you can think of that's funny, they thought of long time ago. The master was a guy named Aristophanes. Again, we're looking at the turn of the century here, around as we turn into the 300s. Only about 11 of his 40 plays have survived. Here's a couple of the most famous. One of his plays is called The Clouds. And in this play, written about the turn of the century, he writes about Socrates. The play goes that a man wants to send his son to be educated, and he sends him to a man named Socrates. And Socrates has some really wild ideas. The boy comes home, starts telling his father all about these crazy things he's learned, and the father wants his money back and goes and attacks Socrates, and all kinds of slapstick comedy ensues. So it's actually one of the only things that we know that Socrates must have existed. We'll come back to this later. Another play, Lysistrata. This is a comedy about the Peloponnesian War. Is war that funny? Well, let's take another look at it. In Lysistrata, what he will say is, how do you stop a war? Well, the women take a role. The women are going to step up. The women of Athens and the women of Sparta will step up and agree that they've got to stop this war. How do you stop a war? You stop having sex with your husbands. Stop making babies. If they have no more children, they can't wage war. And of course, the men will have to take action against that. So here's Greek ideas of comedy, slapstick and social commentary. And they're still performed today. Here's a handbill for going to see the production of The Clouds. Here's a film version of Lysistrata. All right, let's change to another topic. Let's talk about philosophy, the Greeks and their philosophy. What does the word mean? Well, the word means love of wisdom, philosophy, love of wisdom. This comes from men in the cities who are going to make their living, as Greece is very wealthy and powerful now, make their living teaching. They will be tutors to wealthy boys. The men, wealthy men will want their sons educated, and so these men will show up and say, hey, I'll teach your kid. Well, what do you want to know as a Greek? What you want to know is how to speak in front of the assembly, how to be persuasive, how to be a leader of your city. And so these tutors will teach what is called rhetoric, which is how to sway an audience, how to get people to vote for you. Today we would call this debate. These are debate coaches teaching what was called back then rhetoric. The idea, the way that these boys were taught, was they were presented with a complexity. Which way do you want the people to go? Plan your arguments and then practice speaking in front of people to sway them, because that would be the most important thing you need in your city if you're going to be in government. So it's not hard to tell. The problem with rhetoric is that you're teaching these young boys that truth is subjective. Truth is what you say it is. Whatever you want the people to believe, that's the truth. And you can kind of see where, the Greeks had no problem with this, being able to sway an audience. Truth is subjective. It's whatever you want it to be. Well, into our story comes Socrates, because Socrates is going to be one of these sophists, except he's going to do things a little bit differently. The time period we're looking at is the time of the Peloponnesian War. In fact, Socrates, what we know about him was that he was a war veteran. He'd fought for Athens. He was a hoplite fighting for Athens. We also know that he was proud of his unattractive appearance. And he will come back from the wars and devote himself to teaching young men. Except what he's going to teach them is not what the normal sophists teach. Sophists are going to be teaching, truth is whatever you want it to be. He's going to say, let's seek real truth. Let's find the answer. If you have a question, there's a definite answer to it. You just need to seek it. And what you're doing this for is such things as virtues. What is virtuous? What is right in life? What is ethical behavior? Well, let's investigate each of these and find an answer to it. There is a true answer if you seek it. How do we know about this? Because Socrates didn't write anything. We know about it from one of his students. One of his students will be a guy named Plato, who we're going to talk about in a second, and he will write about his teacher that he loved. The way Socrates did this was he would have a group of people. They would gather and usually drinking wine around a table in what is called a symposium. Socrates would submit a question, and then he would ask for answers, and he wouldn't tell them the answer. This is called the Socratic method. He didn't tell people, here's the truth, because you can find it yourself if you search hard enough. It's not a teacher's job to tell you the answer. It's a teacher's job to get you to seek it for yourself. It's called the Socratic method. Today in education, we love the Socratic method if you can ever achieve it. So here's Socrates, the greatest teacher of all time, if Plato is to be believed. He has some catchphrases. You've got to have some good catchphrases. One of them is know thyself. You should spend your life getting to know yourself. Who are you? What do you stand for? And then another catchphrase, the unexamined life isn't worth living. What are you living for? Why are you here? If you're not examining your life, you're just wasting space. The unexamined life isn't worth living. You can reverse that and say the examined life, that's worth living. Well, he's going to run into trouble because as his students begin to question everything about their city, Athens loses the Peloponnesian War. They are a loser. Their city is humiliated. And now you've got a bunch of young kids running around saying, well, we lost because of such and such, and we lost because of hubris. And it doesn't take long for the city fathers to find a villain, and it's going to be Socrates, and they will have him ostracized. He will be ostracized from the city, except he doesn't leave. And they say, you know, you have to go. This is our ruling. We can't kill you. That's not what we do. We ostracize you. You're not allowed in the city. His defense is that this is his job. You have a job, and this is his job. He's a human gadfly. Now, if you're wondering what a gadfly is, down here in the South, we would use the term horsefly. He's a human horsefly. He goes around and buzzes and makes noise and lands on you occasionally, stings you, gets your attention. He doesn't hurt you in any way. He just gets your attention, wakes you up. Well, they're still going to order him to leave, and when he refuses to leave, they'll tell him, then you've got to kill yourself. And he will choose the poison. In 399, he will hold a final symposium and gather all of his students together, and he will take the poisonous hemlock drink, refusing to leave Athens. He would rather die than leave his city. So it's quite amazing stuff. The greatest teacher of all time, Socrates. All right, let's talk about his student. His number one student, Plato, the one who wrote about Socrates. So we're continuing on from the death of Socrates. Plato, having watched his teacher be ostracized, will not be in Athens. He will not do his actual teaching in Athens. He will set up an academy just outside of Athens and gather students. Now, he will change things a little bit. Where Socrates was talking about, let's go find truth to help you with your life, Plato goes off on a tangent here and says, well, the reason we can all find these answers is that they exist inside of us. Idealism. The ideal things we're looking for exist already in us. You just need to go in there and find them. And they exist in ideal forms. When you want to know what is the best tree, what is the best chair, what is the best mother, well, the reason you can find them is because they exist in ideal forms in an unseen world. In this world, you see a corrupted version of them, a mother, a teacher, a chair, but they exist in a perfect world in an ideal form. Yep, we're getting pretty deep here. So when you get into Plato, we're talking about something completely different here. When Socrates was talking about how do you know what good courage is, well, you know it when you see it, because it exists in a perfect form. How do you know what justice is? Well, it's because it exists in a perfect form inside of your brain. You're just going to see a corrupted version in this world. And then beauty, we all recognize beauty. This is beautiful, that's less beautiful. It's because there's a perfect beauty, an ideal of beauty inside your brain. This is called metaphysics, this unseen world of your brain. You can go into it and compare it to this world. Metaphysics, the study of an unseen world, things that you can't physically see in this world. The way he described it is through an allegory, what we're talking about. He's going to give an allegory of being inside of a cave, the way that there's things that you see and then things that exist in perfection. He gives the example of a cave, that you are chained into a cave watching this back wall. You're seeing images along a back wall. What actually is happening is there's a light source here projecting light across an image, across an ideal form, and you're seeing an image on the wall. These are the ideal forms. You just don't see them because you can't turn around. He says you're chained to the floor. You can't turn around your entire life until somebody finally breaks the chains and is able to look back and see what perfection really is, that you're watching an imperfect world. And he will ask you to turn around, and you won't, because this is simpler. It's just easier to watch the wall. Very few people will want to crawl out of the cave and see the real thing. Here's another idea of it, that you're chained here watching images, but you could see the real thing, but it's just easier to watch the images. Few people will actually leave the cave. What we're talking about here is, ideal forms with the cave, and then where he presented that was in a book on political science. He's going to be the father of political science, the father of metaphysics, the father of political science. His book is called The Republic, the Ideal Government. Well, what he says in The Republic is that we should have three classes. There are three classes of people. Producers. You should spend your life making things. It's what makes humans fulfilled. And then he's a Greek, and so he can't see beyond warfare, that in this world there's always going to be warfare, so we need to have a warrior class. And then finally, who's going to run the government? Well, the people who are able to leave the cave, break their chains, see reality, see the ideal forms, and can understand what a perfect government should be. He calls them philosopher kings. And actually, he says women can be too. He's actually pro-women, that women can actually join the rank of the philosopher kings. So Plato's Republic, quite famous at the time and even quite famous today, the father of political science. All right, let's talk about Aristotle. One of Plato's students was Aristotle. So we continue on the chain. And again, you might also notice that from teacher to student, there's a bit of a change. Students don't follow their teachers blindly. Aristotle looks at his teacher and says, well, you know, as a student in Plato's Academy, it's great to read about ideal forms and talk about ideal forms. What's more useful, however, is things in the physical world. You can talk to people all day about an unseen world. It really doesn't do much good. If you want to change this world, we need to have an idea. And his idea is what's called the golden mean. What's the best behavior in this world? Somewhere in the middle. Extreme left, extreme right, extreme up, extreme down. No, somewhere in the middle. Just choose a middle path, a golden mean, and everything will work out. And then going beyond that, he examines this world. He will be the father of biology, the idea of studying living things. He, in studying living things, will come up with an idea of taxonomy. The idea that, hey, look, some things have 4 legs, some things have 6 legs, 8 legs. These belong in families. Looking at plants even. Some things have a leaf shape like this. Some things are green. Some things are yellow. He'll try to group them into families according to statistics. He's not perfect, but it's a start. A new way of looking at life. And then he moves on to political science like his teacher. He'll want to look at political science. He'll write a book on politics in which he'll coin a phrase, man is a political animal. All he sees around him. When you look at these Greeks, they love politics. They love being involved in their city. Man, according to him, is a political animal. Well, the way you study government is the same way that you study plants and animals. You observe them closely. And what he sees among the Greeks is all these different cities have different governments. Well, there's different types. One type is monarchy. The city of Sparta still had kings, and there were other kings around. So there's some form of government called monarchy, in which case you've got a one-man rule or one-family rule. And then another version that he saw were aristocracies. Some cities had aristocracies, in which case you had a ruling family based on blood. And then finally, constitutional governments. Some cities had formed a system different from monarchy, different from aristocracy. They actually come up with a system that everyone agreed on. This would be like Athens with its constitutional government of assemblies and men of certain powers. So he went around. That's how we know so much about the Greek cities, is he studied their governments. What he comes up with, he has an answer for you. What he comes up with is a city-state is obviously the best, and that's pretty much what the Greeks would agree with. Any Greek would say, yes, my city-state's number one. Should we all unify Greece? No, that's too unwieldy. We'll end up hating each other. So city-state is the best form of government, and you would be surprised that he does not like democracy. You know, we praise the Greeks so highly for democracy. You know, what a wonderful idea they came up with. Well, he was not a fan, because what he saw was demagogues, men who could sway audiences. He's watching these sophist teachers teach children to sway the audience. And, you know, he needs 51% of the vote. 49% of the people vote one way, 51% vote the other way, and you get outvoted in a democracy by people who may not have the best interest at heart. So it's interesting to see his view, the Greeks' thoughts on politics. And then he studied everything else. He wrote a book on aesthetics. What is aesthetics? Well, what is pleasing to the eye? What makes things pleasing to the eye? This must have been an amazing time in Athens. Athens defeating the Persians and then losing in the Peloponnesian War, still definitely culturally active in the arts and philosophy. Pretty amazing stuff. One more topic I want to look at here, kind of off the track here, is the Olympic Games. The Greeks come up with the Olympics because the Olympics are kind of instructive about the Greek mentality. In these Olympic Games, it starts off with this. It starts off with running. Let's just see who the fastest Greek is. And who would want to know, well, Zeus does. It starts off as a festival to Zeus. Zeus wants to know who the best runners are, and then they have a place. It's called Olympia. It is on the western side of the Peloponnesus, pretty much far away from everything, so it's just in the middle of nowhere. They will go to Olympia, Every city will send its best runner. And this starts in the year 776 BCE. If you go back a few lectures, we talked about Greece coming out of the Dark Age. That pretty much marks Greek coming out of the Dark Age. As you know, if you're living in a Dark Age, you can't have everybody gather peacefully and run a race. So 776 probably marks the start of the end of the Dark Age, because now you can peacefully go to Olympia and watch people race. Well, it doesn't take them long. You know, Greeks are very competitive. It doesn't take them long to go out there and watch some foot races and then figure out, hey, let's see some other stuff. You know, foot races are won by the skinniest guy with long legs. You know, Zeus is a war guy. You know, let's see who the big tough guys are. And it doesn't take them long to figure out that let's do a thing of 5. Who can win these 5 events? A pentathlon, in which you'll have javelin throwing, a warrior event, long jumping, and then different types of races making up a pentathlon. And then, of course, from there, you will have more events, including eventually, bare knuckle wrestling, bare knuckle boxing, and all kinds of mean stuff going on, tough guy events. I want to finish by looking at some of the myths of the Olympics. The Olympics have a few myths to them. One myth would be that women were not allowed, and that is a correct myth. Women had their own Olympics. They would go off and do their own thing. Men were not allowed there. Another myth is of them being always naked. Now, this comes to us from a few things. Number one, the word gymnasium. The Greeks would practice in a gymnasium. The word gymnos means naked, so you'd have a bunch of naked men practicing in a gymnasium. And this is also what you see in the pictures. Here's naked men running there, naked men wrestling here. Historians kind of question this, though. Maybe this is an ideal form, naked men, when in real life, probably they wore some kind of clothing. This is kind of a common sense thought. You know, if you're going to race somebody, you probably want to have a loincloth on or something. So it's kind of interesting. We're still studying the Greeks, and their culture continues even till to the day.